disregarding the events that are going on in the Middle East between, Israel and Gaza or Palestine or whatever. I find this growing American sentiment against the interests of, defending Israel or things of that nature. I'm sure you've all seen the Pew News article that talks about how American sentiment, the importance of the Israel Hamas war is becoming less and less important to Americans. And I think that's been sort of had a ripple effect in Congress. That is something that's very interesting that you're almost seeing like, almost faction splitting between, Republicans and Democrats within their own respective parties. But today, a tweet from Marjorie Taylor Greene, of all people, caught my eye today about the IGO Anti-Boycott Act, more specifically HR 867. It was introduced by Representative Mike Lawler on January 31st, claiming to be a bipartisan legislation, and I assume it probably would pass in a bipartisan fashion. But there are legitimate criticisms, in my opinion, that can be made that are, I think, worth looking at. Um, Basically, the premise of the IGO Anti-Boycott Act is to amend the Anti-Boycott Act of 2018 to extend its provisions to include international government organizations such as like the United Nations, the European Unions, various Islamic Muslim leagues I have on here. But basically, the bill itself, um, according to the Library of Congress, seeks to prohibit U.S. individuals and entities, both individuals and entities, from participating in supporting boycotts against countries that are friendly to the United States, and particularly Israel, when such boycotts are specifically initiated by these IGOs. Now, I'm not familiar, so to speak, about IGOs initiating boycotts, but I think the underlying message of this bill is concerning, and I think it has less to do with opinions and sentiments of Israel, rather this idea of what constitutes a First Amendment protection. I can have my own ideas and thoughts about Israel and Hamas and a lot of the encampments or pro Palestine marches around my college campuses and various other college campuses. A lot of the sentiments and things that they spew out are things that I disagree with. However, as an American, this idea of liberty, this idea of right to protest, um, is one that you should respect no matter who's coming at it. And what you find interesting is that these super far right and super far left people who are against Israel and promoting dog whistles of anti-Semitism, while I will acknowledge that, and it has become a problem, this idea of anti-Semitism in America, peddled by these influencers, these pundits, and these Congress people. Um, in my opinion, that doesn't automatically give the right for a blank check to end every pro-Palestinian or hell even pro-Israel, march, right? And I like to borrow a quote from Antonin Scalia, Justice Antonin Scalia, very controversial guy, considered an originalist on the Supreme Court, said, who gets to be king, right? It's a noble idea to say, hey, look, we don't want any hate speech. We don't want certain groups or individuals to be targeted against, and I understand that's a very noble and reasonable thing. But the problem becomes who gets to decide, this is okay, this is not, this is a joke, this is not, this is racist, this is not, right? Who gets to decide that? And so when you're handing out a blank check to shut down all boycotts that are initiated by IGOs, that language to me screams something similar of the Espionage Act of World War I, where people who were outspoken against World War I were just put in prison, didn't get due process, none of that, just because they were outspoken against the United States. Free speech to me is definitely a double-edged sword, right? But I think one end of the sword is much more sharper than the other. You know, at the behest of, this idea that we get to freely express ourselves and the government can't theoretically imprison us for our political beliefs. Um, this also leads down a dark rabbit hole of, you know, these things that, obviously, things like the OKC bombing, for example, or, these neo-Nazi, errant supremacist groups, or even January 6th, which was conspired on online chat forums and things like that. that's the other end of the sword. And so it's definitely a delicate balancing act of, we want to uphold the values of free speech because who are we to judge on, what is correct and what is not? But then at the same time, it's like, I do see the other side, and I do see this, so-called bipartisan support for this idea where it's like we can't tolerate these things on campuses or anywhere in public spaces. Um, I think I'm not enough of a legal scholar to draw that line, but I will acknowledge that there is tension, and I do disagree with this idea that anything that is pro-Palestine or pro-Israel or pro this or anti that, um, the idea that it should just be immediately, you know, crossed out and put an end to, and people should be fined or even put into prison is sort of ridiculous. And I also wanted to point out the fact that it's like usually, you had your alt-right people and your alt-left people, and they kind of kept to their own weird conspiracy things and all those things. But now you're seeing an ever increasing amount of alt-right people supporting the alt-left, the extremism you see in the right and the extremism of the left, in terms of, and this has been perpetuated and rippled, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, by the Israeli Hamas war. It's like, or Israel Palestine war, whatever you want to call it, right? It's like um, Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, she's pro-America and America first and all that kind of stuff she likes to claim, and she's totally against sending any money to Israel, totally against sending any money to Ukraine because, she's sticking up for the American. While on the opposite side, you have people maybe like AOC or I forgot the senator representative from Minnesota, Ilhan Omar, coming on the side of, this is a human rights issue. We need to stop funding Israel because of human rights issues. We are sympathetic towards the Palestinian cause. Both of these people on face value, right? This idea of being pro-America or pro-humanitarian rights, America first, these serve as, okay, yeah, I guess that's logical in that sense, but then, you read in between the lines and what kind of dog whistling this perpetuates. And of course, it results in extremism and this idea that, anti-Semitism is on the rise. But then that goes to my other point about like who gets to decide. Who gets to decide? Is it the people who are being affected? Is it the people perpetrating, um, the alleged attack or remark, right? So it's a dicey game when you think about it. Um, but I guess just to end this video, I'd say like for the common man, like for me or for anybody who's like not really, I would say not passionate, but looking to ideas and things like that. I think the best idea always and always is, um, you know, the worst thing about politics is when you just become a part of this tribe, and no matter what, the tribal leaders, the political pundits will say, you have to agree with it, otherwise, you're kicked out of the tribe or you're made humiliated. I think the best thing is always try to prove your opinion wrong. Try to take on other opinion points. Try to do a bunch of other things that is not going to lead you down this dark rabbit hole of just like that my side is always correct. It's like I find it so interesting how political junkies, many of them who read articles, watch the news, do all those good things that we encourage, are the ones who are perpetuating the most division. Right? It's like, do you really think that your political ideology, your specific political ideology, is correct in all circumstances? You know how many political ideologies there are. You know how many um, issues and things that people disagree with, even though they both call themselves liberals or conservatives or extremists or not. So this idea of just always being open, always being willing to learn. You know, I'd like to think that instead of starting with a conclusion, instead of starting with, this is what I want, this is my belief, and then finding evidence to back your claim and then disavowing anybody who disagrees with you, is more like, okay, let's see all the evidence and let's come to a conclusion. But yeah, you know, critics of this bill like to claim that anything that is pro Palestine or against Israel is going to be shut down completely. If that were to be the case, I'll just entertain that. I think proponents of the bill would disagree with that, but I would just entertain that. If that were the outcome, obviously that would be wrong, and I would be hard pressed to see the Supreme Court of the United States upholding this bill. But I don't know. I think I have a lot to learn. I'm not 1,000,000% sure. If or not, I'm in favor of this bill. It's more so intriguing. I'm not really the most opinionated person. I'm more so um, looking just to learn. And yeah, but let me know your guys' thoughts, and thank you for watching.